All right, well, thank you all very much for coming, and I want to thank Amy Yu and her colleagues for organizing such a great event this year and every year prior. So, as Marianne said, today I'm going to talk about the complex drivers and dynamics in the highly dynamic field of generics and biosimilars from both sides of the looking glass. Presentation outline, pretty standard in any competitive intelligence presentation, whether it's here or in a report that we're giving to a client. We like to try and outline things, and in competitive intelligence, we as competitive intelligence practitioners are tasked with doing the due diligence, discovery, asking the what's, why's, how's, and when's. So what are we doing here? Discovering the key facts and figures of generics and biosimilars, the market opportunity, from fiscal year 2014 and forward-looking, going through both sides of the looking glass from ethical biopharma, from the proprietary view. What does this mean? What is competitive intelligence in generics and biosimilars? Also looking through the generics viewpoint, or the generics lens, the aperture. Finally, taking you through the actionability and the conclusions, and then a questions and answer session. So this presentation, we will discuss about AB rating or similar type of generics and biosimilars opportunities, not generics or biosimilars that do not have general interchangeability. The purpose of this talk is to focus on, again, the dynamics, drivers, and levers of generics and biosimilars with respect to U.S. and outside U.S. general corporate strategy, actionability, brand planning, and strategic defense, and tactical implementation. In terms of the overall opportunity, what is it? The pharmaceutical patent cliff generally has expired, it's ended, but there's still a sufficiently significant near-term and mid-term loss of exclusivity for major and not necessarily blockbuster, but peri-blockbuster biopharmaceutical brands. And in terms of generic opportunities and actionability with competitive intelligence, it doesn't matter what your role or remit is within the walls of a pharma company or within an agency, or whether you're an ethical, proprietary pharmaceutical company or a generics house or biosimilars firm. There is a role and a definitive need for competitive intelligence, primary, secondary, strategic gaming sessions, or other, with respect to the development and facilitation of competitive intelligence in this space. So we can move on to generics and biosimilars. Here we're sourcing a McKinsey analysis from late 2013 as well as an evaluated analysis in late 2015 to aggregate the asset classes according to broken down columns there, biologics, oral solids, from the past, present, and forward-looking opportunity across all binary opportunities, steady opportunities, and mixed opportunities for these different types of assets. We rank order the market value opportunity based upon our internal assessment from a gradient shading of low, high, a light teal to a darker blue. And as you see, biologics represent the highest opportunity, 79 assets, followed by injectables or sterile injectable products. So this is a great opportunity. And these are binary opportunities, which means go, no go. Steady opportunities with sterile injectable products, which are very interesting. That represents a great market with Lyo formulations and others worldwide. Frozen bags, Galaxy bags, etc. Okay. This graph here speaks to upcoming loss of exclusivity opportunities to be dominated in the future by what are called differentiated generics products, which is a true paradigm shift versus the historical lens of generics players. Historically, generics players went for what are called small molecule pure plays, which were very easy opportunities where you throw a lot of darts, get a lot of ANDAs, and go for things, and you get something approved and get a critical mass. That opportunity would allow you to get market erosion, price erosion, ultimately price destruction, and you'd win on critical mass. Differentiated generics enable you to win on higher prices, lower amounts. And as you see here, the differentiated generics truly dominate in each year moving forward from present in 2014 through 2019. But historically, that is not the case. So when we look at the fiscal year 14 and forward-looking market opportunity, we at Molekule, in our internal analysis, developed 3 models in 3 different buckets: a historical model, a current model, and a forward-looking model, which we define as easy victories in the past, progressive model for the current, which goes through to 2017, 2012 to 2017, an aspirational model for 2017 and beyond. And we believe that there's been a significant evolution that will continue through this period. Key drivers for success in the historical model focus on easy to formulate generics for easy wins. And you have minimal market hurdles. But the key hurdle was overcoming Hatch-Waxman, developed in '84. So when something's novel, you need to come in with something easy to overcome the novelty, because you don't know the unknown. You need to transcend the unknown and be able to differentiate. You came in with a local or regional play and developed an international architecture, and that's what happened in the generics world. You won by a critical mass approach, and you had a low to moderate cost to benefit ratio. From 2012 to 2017, our analysis at Molekule shows that there has been a trend towards a developing and manufacturing market of differentiated generics, more towards difficult to manufacture and difficult to formulate products, with a mid-scale, international, but not necessarily global footprint for these generics players and biosimilars players. Portfolio-centric approach, therapy area dominance, and subject matter excellence, with a moderate high cost-benefit ratio. However, generics and biosimilars players have been wrought with significant amount of 483s and manufacturing downfalls and shortfalls, ASH-P issues. These issues dominate and predominate the market. Forward-looking from 2017 and beyond is this aspirational model where you're harmonizing and uniformly trying to shift resource allocations 80-20 towards complex generics and biosimilars versus authorized generics. It's a global model. We have manufacturing excellence, continuous and seamless CGMP regardless of the facility, location, and integrated global centers of excellence. You have a high to extreme global cost to benefit ratio. The returns on investment are great, but the actual sunken costs are great too. When we speak to the leverage of competitive intelligence, what it is for major MNC pharma versus major biotech versus small boutique biotech versus small boutique biopharma. There are different benefits conferred because the portfolios, assets contained within these companies are different. So what are the services that are offered by primary CI vendors? What are the services that are needed by these pharma companies that actually confer benefits? And that's something that we tried to depict here in the slide. Major MNC pharmas, when they're dealing with generics threat assessments, look to defend small molecules with high need, large molecules with moderate need, inhalers, topicals, and injectables. In so doing, there's a need for peri and post-LOE landscaping, strategic wargaming, cold chain assessments, and predictive mapping and modeling of generic supply chains. The return on investments are varied, and in a later slide we'll discuss in a 2x2 matrix where the strategic actionability and insight is gleaned from these assessments. Biotech, however, typical pure-play biotech is working with large molecules with moderate to high need. And for this, there are manufacturing assessments which is the greatest need, because the manufacturing of large molecules necessitates a much more complex play. The COGS are higher, the costs are much more dynamic. Strategic gaming and scenario planning is necessary in manufacturing, supply chain, and logistics, and distribution competitive analyses are much more dynamic. This slide here dictates where the competitive intelligence exercises and assessments enable pharma companies from both sides of the vantage point to position themselves for robust success. If you look at 2x2, you see that we have generic threat assessments in the one position, which brings you high relative applicability versus the peri-LOE environment, but in the low relative applicability in the post-LOE environment. Whereas in the number 2 position, manufacturing and technology assessments bring you a high relative applicability in both environments. So I encourage you to study this graph on your slides at a later point, so I don't have to read through everything, because this actually gives a lot of value as to where you as a pharma company or you as a consultancy should be selling or buying the services at different points of the life cycle. So, fog of war, it's a term that we use all the time in either strategic gaming and competitive landscaping, etc. What does it mean? That we live in a vacuum. We don't know what the other guys are doing. And the synthesis and actionability of competitive intelligence, these disparate primary research quotes and interviews that we do, don't really mean anything. It's living in the fog of war. When you combine things together, you get actionability if they're targeted, vetted, and triangulated. And if you strategically leverage them properly, you'll be able to enable the true gravitas and the nature of competitive intelligence. It prevents you from seeing red herrings. It prevents you from missteps and mistriangulations. And when you rationalize and combine together some total primary competitive insights and implications, they're palpable and actionable intelligence. So to quote Sun Tzu in that last bullet point, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. I know we're not dealing with war here, but it's competitive. Enemy replaces competitor, and battle can place with competitive engagement. So here we're discussing best practices in competitive intelligence. The interplay of CI, brand strategy, and defense enables ethical biopharma to entrench versus generics and maintain ROIs for its established brands. There's different types of ways to do so. Targeted generics assessments, snapshot in time, continuous proactive gaming, which is persistent competitive landscaping, and strategic sessions, formerly known as wargaming. The actionability and insights and implications gleaned are defined by specific determinants which go into doing this. And the key competitive victories, which are the outcomes, are what's differential. The key to winning is really a patchwork of these different exercises. It's not one disparate thing, especially if you're involved in biosimilars and generics, because biosimilars and generics requires a combination of regulatory, supply chain logistics, manufacturing, clinical, etc. And it's not just one thing, a snapshot in time. There's so much going on in the dynamic generics world in a multinational environment that if you just go for one of these types of exercises, you're missing out 80-20. So now we're going to look at generic pharma instead of ethical pharma, and how we can look at the implications of CI for generic pharma. This chart here is your standard curve of how generics players conduct thorough due diligence and landscaping and prospecting prior to committing to firm asset selection. From the value chain journey, if you will, from the selection of an exclusive or non-exclusive API all the way through to price erosion or price destruction of a proprietary brand over time. So key learnings. Generics players need informed perspectives on competitive landscapes with respect to potential generic entrants before the asset review and selection. You can't just go blind. They either do it internally based on budgets, their due diligence teams and portfolio selection and review teams, or they engage with some kind of a firm to do the due diligence. Understanding the dynamics and drivers and potential pressure points of competitive generic development programs, as well as competitor MNC or specialty pharma, ethical pharma, brand defense strategies is critical to understanding how they can go to market and what are the actual development programs they can do, what are the timings, what are the points that they can enter, how they can enter, where they can enter, why they can enter. And informed knowledge predicated on meaningful competitive intelligence research translates to meaningful and measurable returns on investment and long-term goals and objectives. So this is an example of an output here, blinded output that we did, the actual analysis, where you look at API to finished formulation, marketing, CGMP, bioequivalent status, and the current level of generic asset development for planned manufacturing integration, just to show you what you can get from an actual CI analysis relative to key intelligence topics and questions. And this is pretty rich and robust and synthesized. This is what you can get from doing primary, and it's not just a bunch of quotes on page. Competitive intelligence also enables pharmaceuticals to achieve lift above the competition among multiple domains of actionability and insight. If you deconstruct manufacturing and supply chain logistics, you can understand the different lever points for competitive success and or failure. At the same time, you can evade blind points and pressure points because you're able to see them with anticipation. And the informed primary CI allows you to predict accurately, if it's done properly, and evade them. Understanding complex and sustainable models and real-world logistics associated with manufacturing supply chains is highly leverageable and actionable. And this supply chain map here, again, is an example of a real-world blinded case study from a Molekule where we take primary insight and intelligence and depict it, synthesize it, and show where assets are going from a global wholesale supply distribution hub to a fill-finish facility to an API manufacturing site for multiple assets. Just to show you how you can translate primary CI, which typically is referred to as just verbiage on a page, into something more meaningful. Synthesis. Conclusions. Generics and biosims represent a highly dynamic and rapidly growing sector within biopharma. CAGR is significant and will continue to trend bullishly for the foreseeable future. I think it's one of the hottest markets, and half the people, 3/4 of the people have spoken to this Congress, generics and biosims is a buzzword. The current FY14 and forward-looking opportunity remains robust despite the patent cliff being overtly over. And new overarching strategies and tactics will be undertaken by generics and biosimilars players moving forward. Ethical biopharmaceutical players, doesn't matter whether you're a microcap player or a mega pharma player, significantly benefit from the RIs conferred throughout the CI competitive intelligence process. The ultimate goal is to preserve market share and defend your proprietary biopharmaceutical brands. In contrast, generics and biosimilar players are keen on knowing leverageable insights into the complex genericization landscape so they can invest and or divest accordingly. And utilizing the CI enables you a very prime vehicle to success and meaningful ROIs. So on that note, I'll take any questions and hopefully be able to answer them. Eric.
Okay, thank you. This is an excellent presentation. You had a slide earlier, the typical lifecycle management. And you identified a point where generics and biosimilars would be targeted. Do you have a time frame?
Let me go back to slide. Tell me when I'm there.
Yeah.
Right here. So the question is when generics and biosimilars would be targeted in terms of the intelligence process from the ethical side.
Why did you target that? I know why conceptually, but on the graph, where do you see that from a time frame? Is that 7 to 8 years out?
Yeah, so from the overall point of doing the due diligence, which would, is there a laser pointer on this? No? I don't know, it's probably not a laser pointer. Not, okay, it's just not a laser pointer on this, I apologize. So, given there's not a laser pointer on this, if you go back to T naught, 00, and you go, so T naught to that point is probably 7 to 8 years. Sorry, that don't have a laser pointer. Neil?
One question, from a generic standpoint, generic market standpoint, what do you see as the point from a critical mass when there are, if you like, when you've uncovered how many generics might be coming onto the market, where the nature of who it is becomes irrelevant, and the reality is the situation that you're managing as a pharma company is essentially market forces, payer behaviors, these sort of things, as opposed to the strategies of the individual companies.
So if I can kind of translate the question, when it goes from kind of a price erosion to price destruction model?
Yeah, I mean, when it goes from a generics company actively managed strategy to a generics company loss leader, pure portfolio, where they're not really actively managing it at all, it's just part of their portfolio.
So it actually depends on the asset. So it depends on the asset in the market. We've seen examples where we've modeled in certain orphan diseases where you'll have generic market entry of 2 generics, one being an authorized generic and one being a non-authorized generic, and that's fine. We've seen other markets in the orphan space where you have 3 or 4 where that's complete mania, if you will. Whereas if you're in kind of antihypertensives, 4 is completely controllable, and you need 7 to 8 generics, and that's going to make it that mania model. So it depends on the model. I mean, if it's a $4 billion orphan drug market, but there's only 200,000 patients, it's completely different than an antihypertensive model where you have millions of patients. But I think generally speaking, the magic number is probably 6 to 8.
So if you're in that sort of situation from a CI standpoint and a usability, would you say the approach needs to change in the approach direction? If you've got someone, say if you've got your magic 6 to 8, if the CI is saying there's going to be 2 companies, in terms of the approach, the direction, the way you need to be thinking about it, is it very different from if your indicators are suggesting it's more like 8 to 10 that are coming into the market?
Absolutely. So when you're doing a CI assessment and you're targeting doing these companies, you absolutely need to wear kid gloves when you're looking at 2 versus 6 to 8. If you have 6 to 8, there's a lot more kind of soft gray space than there is if there's 2. Eric?
Just to pick up on that question, it got me thinking. So, granted, orphan drugs and more mainstream hypertension, things like that are different. So if you look at the upcoming, and this is just speculative, if you look at the upcoming biosimilar MABs in the big areas, oncology, rheumatology, and stuff like that, you're not going to get 6 to 8 players. Do you have an idea of where a company might just say, look, we're going to be 4th or 5th to market, and then early on in the curve they're just going to say, we're going to pull back? Or have you seen any indication of the number of biosimilar competitors that you would see in the program?
Yeah, I think, again, that depends on the asset and the market opportunity. So if you look among the different biosimilars and the innovator reference biologics, if the market opportunity is, say, X $billion versus Y $1 billion, and Y billion represents 2X, there will probably be more likely 3 players than 2 players, 4 players than 3 players, if you will. So these companies are very smart. They do a tremendous amount of analytics, they do a tremendous amount of forecasting, and they're highly dialed into what the competition is doing. So their internal, a lot of the biosims groups within the developers of biosimilars have externalized CI, as well as have internal CI groups, and they leverage them both quite well. Put it that way. Yes?
You talked about the complex molecules and difficult to manufacture. So how would that, act there? What is this then?
So Advair is a very interesting case because the device has been kind of the crux of the issue with the US FDA, right? So I believe it was Teva tried to genericize Advair a number of times, but kept on getting hung up on the device, right, on the discus. So if you can't get the device pathway approved, you're going to have problem getting the fixed combination of the serotype and the beta agonist approved, which is a problem. So that's something, but the market opportunity for Advair is massive. So complex generics are definitely the way of the future, and the manufacturing of these complex generics, if you're able to overcome that hurdle, you're going to be one of two, or one of one generics players doing it, which means you have basically a duopoly or a three-horse race, which is an amazing opportunity as a generic, because the pricing premiums or the pricing loss versus the innovator pricing is amazingly upheld, versus paying 20 cents on the dollar or even a penny on the dollar for metformin, glucophage, right?
So given that, innovative market, manufacturing is that one of the triple combos respiratory, like the new wheels.
Right.
Going the market, the peers are not endorsing it or not allowing that kind of going to mainstream. How do you see that fear intervention given? How does that come into your assessment?
In terms of,
Like, there's innovation going on in respiratory.
Right.
Right, so we double, triple combos, and real, and devices
Right.
as well, right? So, but the peers are restricting,
Right.
not allowing that they were, even though it's more sophisticated, a better, device, a better, combo, right? But the peers are restricting it, so they're not allowing it to come in but the patients are demanding it. So there's a lot of play going on, and how do you see that space shaping up in the next 5 to 7 years?
I'd assume that eventually someone is going to be able to get the manufacturing hurdle overcome with the Advair, and GSK is going to have a problem. So from that point, I don't think that the Brio is going to be medically necessary for certain patients who are refractory, right? So if it's medically necessary in refractory patients, that's a win for Brio. In non-medically necessary patients, you're going to have PNT and formulary access issues. But in medically necessary patients, it's a win. And it's just a matter of cost and pharmacoeconomics and pharmaceutical dynamics, like anything else. If you can win on some kind of pharmacodynamic study or a pharmacoeconomic study, that's another play that you can have.
And how does CI come to, how does CI add value to this, this space?
How does what add value?
Some competitive intelligence, right? And this is more of a strategic conversation.
It's a strategic conversation, but the CI kind of builds into the strategy. So when you're doing strategy, you can spouse on a lot of different issues, but what are you predicating that strategy on? What are you basing it on? Internal stakeholder interviews only, typically, right? So your internal stakeholder interviews are all good and well, but that's based on the perspective of your own company. And I'm sure that the people within your company also have perspectives of their colleagues at other companies, because everyone knows everyone in this industry. That being said, are they going to tell Joe Smith at GSK something that's deep and dark and secret at BI? Not necessarily. So that's where CI comes into play. Then you can leverage that and triangulate it with the strategy group. Or have some kind of a hybrid consultancy that does both strategy and CI, which is kind of the best model. Yes?
Okay, so thinking in the vaccines perspective,
Sure.
so there's new strategies to deal with top diseases like tuberculosis, in which they're using a combination heterologous boost strategies. You plan with one vector,
Right.
and then it goes with the other. How do you see generics kind of coming to this